His name was Zarek, and he had burned a human colony once. He remembered it well. The way the sky turned orange, the way the humans ran in all directions like small animals knocked from a nest. He had watched it from the bridge of his flagship, the Vorthen, with a cup of hot spiced liquid in his hand, and he had felt nothing. Not guilt, not joy, just a kind of clean, quiet satisfaction that the job was done. That was 3 years ago. The colony had been called Harkin's Point. It sat on the edge of the Callum Reach, a stretch of dead space between two human-controlled systems where the patrol routes were thin and the response time was slow. Zarek had done his homework. He always did. He counted the patrol ships, mapped the gaps, and timed the rotations. Then he moved in fast, hit hard, and left before anyone could organize a proper response. 41 ships in his fleet. 2 human patrol vessels destroyed. The colony's defense grid knocked out in the first 12 minutes. The settlement itself, 6,000 people, a mining operation, 3 water processing stations reduced to twisted metal and scorched ground in under an hour. He had not stayed to watch the humans pick through the wreckage. That was not his style. He got in, he did what he came to do, and he left. The humans would be angry, he had thought. They would file reports. They would hold meetings. They would talk about consequences and justice and all the soft words that soft species use when they do not have the stomach to do anything real. He had been wrong about that part. Zarek was not a stupid creature. He was in fact extraordinarily smart. Smart enough to have built a mercenary fleet from 14 rusted ships and bad debts into one of the most feared independent war groups in 3-star systems. Smart enough to have survived 2 assassination attempts, 1 civil war on his home world, and a stint in a Cathari prison that would have killed most beings in the first month. He was sharp, he was patient, and he read people well. He had simply completely fundamentally misread humans. He had looked at them and seen their softness, the way they negotiated when they should have fought, the way they grieved loudly and publicly over their dead, the way they built gardens on space stations and kept small animals as companions. And he had concluded that softness was all the way through, that their core was as yielding as their surface. The first sign that he was wrong came 4 months after Harkin's Point. One of his forward bases, a refueling station hidden inside a hollowed asteroid in the Mech Belt, went dark. No distress signal, no warning, just silence and then nothing. He sent a scout ship. The scout found the asteroid cracked open like an egg. The station inside was completely destroyed. Every ship in the dock either shattered or vented. Whoever had done it had not left a single message, not a single claim of responsibility. They had just erased it and moved on. Zarek had assumed it was a rival, another mercenary group maybe, or one of the Cathari border gangs who had been getting bolder lately. He had asked around. Nobody claimed it. 3 months after that, his secondary weapons cache on Drill Station was seized. Not destroyed, seized. Human military intelligence had walked in with 12 armed officers and a legal document and taken everything right down to the spare power cells. His contact at Drell had disappeared the same night. He never surfaced again. 2 months later, his fleet's fuel supplier, a Greenwich trader named Obas who had been doing business with Zarek for 6 years, was arrested by human authorities at VA port and handed a list of charges so long that the document had to be printed in 2 sections. Obas sent Zarek a message from detention that said only. They knew everything. Every transaction, every date, every ship name, they knew all of it. Zarek had stared at that message for a long time. They knew all of it. He had been careful. He was always careful. He used false ship registrations, rotating contact names and payment methods that passed through 7 different financial layers before touching anything connected to him. He ran his operation like a man who expected to be hunted because he always had been. And still somehow someone had found every thread and pulled it. He started losing people after that. Not in battle, not to any kind of direct confrontation. They just disappeared. His intelligence officer on Sarek Prime stopped responding to messages. His secondary fleet commander, a brutal and reliable soldier named Reth, was found dead in a docking bay on Coral Station with no explanation and no witnesses. His weapons technician, a civilian, a non-combatant who knew nothing about military operations except how to calibrate rail guns, was arrested on a planet he had not told anyone he was visiting. They were picking his network apart slowly, methodically, like someone dismantling a machine, removing one part at a time in exactly the right order, so that the whole thing kept running long enough for the operator not to notice how much had already been taken away. Zarek noticed he was smart enough for that, but by the time he noticed, he had already lost more than he could replace. He started digging. He called in favors, paid for information, leaned on contacts in human border stations and trading posts and military-adjacent zones. It took 4 weeks and cost him more currency than he liked to think about, but eventually he got a name. Admiral Alina Vass. He had heard the name before vaguely, the way you hear a sound from another room. Present but not important. A human fleet admiral based out of the 7th Reach Command known for anti-piracy operations. He had thought nothing of her. He started paying attention now. What he found made him sit very still for a long time. Alina Voss had joined the human military at 18. She had spent the first decade of her career in the kind of postings that don't make records. Small ships, border patrols, quiet work in systems that never appeared in the news. She had been promoted not because she was loud or politically connected, but because the people above her kept putting her in charge of problems, and the problems kept getting solved quietly, completely with very little mess. Her first major command had been a counter-piracy operation in the Reach borderlands that had been going badly for 2 years before she took it over. In 9 months, the piracy rate in that zone had dropped by 73%. Not because she had destroyed any particular fleet in a great battle. Because she had dismantled every support structure those pirates relied on, their fuel sources, their informants, their safe ports, their banking contacts, until they were operating in a vacuum, cut off from everything, and then she had destroyed them. She had done it twice more after that in different systems with different groups with the same result. Zarek read her file and understood with the particular clarity of someone who is too smart to lie to himself that he had not been fighting a patrol response. He had been fighting a campaign and he had not known it was happening until it was most of the way finished. He could have run. He knew that he had enough ships and enough currency left to relocate to go deep into the outer systems where human reach was thin to start over somewhere quiet. He had done it before. It was not pleasant but it was survivable. He did not run. Partly it was pride, though he would not have used that word because pride was a soft species concept and he preferred to think of it as strategic self-preservation of reputation. A commander who runs teaches everyone who watches that he can be made to run. That lesson spreads, and once it spreads, you are no longer feared. And without fear, everything he had built over 20 years was worth nothing. But it was more than pride. He was angry. He had burned a colony on the edge of a patrol gap. That was business. That was the reality of operating in contested space. He had done what powerful groups always did to weaker ones. He had demonstrated that he could, and he had taken what he wanted and he had left. The humans were supposed to file their reports and harden their patrol routes and treat it as an unfortunate lesson learned. That was how it was supposed to go. Instead, one human officer had decided to make it personal. Had decided to hunt him like prey. Had picked apart everything he built with the cold, patient thoroughness of someone who was not angry at all, which was somehow worse than if she had been furious. Fury made mistakes. Whatever Alina Voss was running, it was not fury. It was something quieter and far more dangerous. He had been treated like a problem to be solved, not an enemy to be feared. He found that unbearable. He pulled what was left of his fleet together. 28 ships, down from 41, which was a loss he did not examine too carefully. He called his remaining commanders to a meeting on the Vorthen, and he told them what he had decided. They were going to find Admiral Voss. They were going to find whatever fleet she was operating from, whatever command structure she was based out of, whatever station or ship or installation she called home, and they were going to destroy it. Not quietly, not surgically. They were going to hit it in a way that would be seen and talked about in every port and trading post and military bar from the core systems to the outer rim. They were going to make it clear that Zarek was not prey. That coming after him had a cost, a real one, the kind that discouraged repetition. His commanders were quiet during this speech. Not inspired quiet, he noticed. Not the silence of soldiers preparing themselves for something necessary, more the silence of people who had thoughts they were deciding not to say out loud. His second in command, a long-limbed and cautious being named Peleth, spoke up when the speech was finished. "She's a fleet admiral," Peleth said. "C-7th Reach Command is not a patrol post. She will have significant defensive resources. I know what she has. Zirich said we have lost a third of our strength in the past 8 months. I know what we have lost." Peleth looked at him for a moment. "I am saying that direct military action against an established human fleet command structure is a different category of operation than what we have been doing. Everything we have done has been a different category of operation when we first did it," Zarek said. "And we did it anyway. That is why we are still here." Peleth did not argue further. None of them did. They had followed him for years and he had always been right enough times to make the times he didn't seem like acceptable variants. They trusted his judgment not because they were loyal in any sentimental way, but because it had paid well to trust it. They would trust it this time, too. Zarek ordered the fleet to begin moving within the week. He had intelligence contacts, fewer than before, but still functional, working on Vasa's current location and the composition of whatever forces she had nearby. He wanted numbers, ship classes, patrol patterns, the shape of what he was walking into. He was careful. He was always careful. He did not sleep well those first few nights. Not from fear. He had categorized what he felt, and fear was not the right word for it. More like a low-frequency vibration in the back of his mind. A warning signal from some part of him that was older and quieter than his conscious thought. Some part that had been watching this woman's file and was sending up a signal he didn't want to hear. He ignored it. He had ignored that signal many times before. It had been wrong enough times to make ignoring it a defensible habit. He would ignore it now. What he did not know, what none of his intelligence contacts were able to tell him because the humans had kept it completely dark, was that Admiral Alina Voss already knew he was coming. She had known for 6 days. She had known because the last 3 contacts he had reached out to for intelligence on her position were people her office had quietly flagged and monitored for over a year. When Zirk started asking questions about her, the questions had shown up in her morning briefing like items on a checklist she had been expecting to see. She had read the report at her desk on the bridge of the Callaway, her flagship, with a cup of coffee in her hand. She had read it twice, put it down, and looked out at the stars for a long moment. Then she called her operations officer and started giving orders. She did not call a fleet-wide meeting. She did not make a speech. She pulled up a star chart, pointed to 3 positions, and explained what she needed in a kind of flat, specific language that did not require her to repeat herself. Her operations officer had taken notes and not asked questions because Admiral Voss's explanations did not usually leave room for questions. When the orders were given and the officer had left, she had gone back to her coffee. There was no anger in her face, no excitement, no particular expression at all. There was only the look of a person who has already decided how something ends and is now simply waiting for the beginning to catch up. The fleet moved in a loose formation through the dark between stars. 28 ships. Not the strongest force Zirich had ever commanded, but not weak either. His flagship, the Vorthan Asterisk, was a heavy assault carrier, old, scarred, repaired so many times that some sections of her hull were a different color from the rest, but still running hot and mean. Around her moved 12 mid-class battle cruisers, 8 fast attack ships, and 7 support vessels. Enough to hit hard, enough to absorb punishment if it came to that. The intelligence had taken longer than he wanted. His contacts, the ones who hadn't been arrested or disappeared, had to work carefully now. They knew they were being watched. Everyone in Zirek's network knew it. The information came in slowly in pieces, passed through so many layers of cutouts and dead drops that by the time it reached him, it was already 3 days old. But it was enough. Admiral Voss's primary base of operations was the Callaway, a command carrier of the Meridian class, long in gray and bristling with weapons emplacements, the kind of ship that cost more to build than some planetary defense budgets. She was operating out of a semi-permanent position near the cache gate, a navigational bottleneck at the edge of the 7th Reach, where 3 patrol corridors converged. Her support group was listed as 14 vessels, a mix of destroyer class and lighter frig. 14 ships against 28. On paper, Zarek had the numbers. He knew it was not that simple. He was not a fool who read numbers without reading context, but he had fought against worse odds before, and he had walked out of it. He had a plan. It was a good plan. Aggressive, fast, designed to close the distance before Voss could get additional forces in range. Hit the Callaway directly. Destroy it or disable it. Leave before a response could be organized. It's hard out. He had done it before. The first week of transit was quiet. His fleet moved through empty space, running minimal communications traffic to avoid the kind of signal footprint that got you noticed. The crew was tense but disciplined. His commanders held their sectors. The ships ran clean. On the 8th day, they picked up a human patrol. It was a small thing. 2 frigates running a standard sweep pattern through the outer edge of the cache approach zone. Routine. Probably not expecting trouble. Zarek tracked them for 4 hours before deciding they posed no risk if left alone and no reward if engaged. He ordered his fleet to adjust their heading by 2 degrees and pass at long range beyond easy sensor resolution. The patrol changed course. Not toward his fleet at an angle. An adjustment that could have been coincidence could have been a scheduled turn in their route. But it put them closer. And Zarek watched them for another hour before concluding that they had in fact detected something. Maybe a power signature. Maybe a sensor ping from one of the support ships running diagnostics. Something had caught their attention. The frigates transmitted a burst of encrypted communication and continued their adjusted course, reporting in most likely, which meant someone was now aware that there was traffic in this zone. Zarek convened a fast command, meeting on the *Vorthen *S bridge. "They've spotted us," said Ven, his tactical officer. A compact gray-skinned being with the perpetual expression of someone calculating something. "We should assume they transmitted a position report." "Assume it," Zarek agreed. "What does it change?" "Our timeline. If they reported a fleet signature this far out, Voss will have some warning. She will have time to call for additional support if she has any available. How long is the gate at current speed?" 4 days. 3 if we push. Do we know what else is in range that she could call? Ven consulted his panel. The intelligence we have suggests 2 patrol squadrons within a day's transit of Kashan. 4 to 6 ships each, possibly more. Zerk looked at the star chart. The math was straightforward. If Voss called in both squadrons before he arrived, she could have 22 ships waiting. Still not as many as his fleet. Still a fight he could win if he was fast enough and hit hard enough. "Push the speed," he said. 3 days and take those frigates down before they can transmit again. The 2 human frigates were fast ships. They were in fact faster than anything in Zarek's fleet except the attack ships, and they proved it immediately. The moment his pursuit ships moved, the frigates turned and ran. They did not fight. They scattered, each going in a different direction, zigzagging at high speed through the dead space. They caught one, the other got away. Health watched the escaping frigate's drive signature fade on the long-range sensors and said nothing for a long moment. "One made it out," he said finally. "Yes," Zarek said. "They ran very fast. They are built for speed. It happens." Peleth was quiet again. Then they ran before we closed to weapons range. The moment our attack ships moved, they separated and ran. What is your point, Pelith? Standard doctrine for a frigate crew that spots a superior force is to maintain visual contact, transmit continuously, and evade. They do not run blind at full speed and scatter in separate directions. That pattern is more consistent with, he paused, choosing his word carefully. Extraction. You think they were placed there on purpose? I think it is a possibility worth considering. Zarek looked at him. Pelth was not a paranoid being. He was methodical and literal, and he did not invent threats where none existed. When Pelth raised a concern, it was worth weighing. Zarek weighed. If Vass placed them there, he said slowly, she placed them there to know where we are and what heading we're running, which means she already knew we were coming. Or she suspected, and now she knows. It changes very little. She will position her fleet, call in whatever support is available, and wait for us. The same battle just with more preparation on her side. More preparation on her side is not a small thing. It also means she has committed. She is not going to scatter or withdraw. She is going to meet us at the gate and she is going to have arranged herself for a defensive engagement. Zarek leaned over the chart. Defensive engagements favor numbers. I have the numbers. Pelth did not look entirely convinced, but he stopped arguing. That was his way. He raised the concern. And if Zarek dismissed it, Pelith catalogued it and returned to his duties without drama. He had been doing this for years. It was one of the reasons Zarek kept him. They pushed a 3-day transit speed. On the second day, they passed through the outer margin of the Kashan approach corridor, a stretch of space defined by 2 large, slowly rotating dust clouds that served as natural navigation markers. It was the kind of terrain that sensor systems found annoying, full of false returns and background scatter that required manual filtering. Zarek had accounted for this. He ordered tighter formation, shorter sensor ranges, and visual confirmation protocols. He had fought in worse visibility. The first engagement came on the second day, early evening by ship's clock. 4 human ships, destroyer class, appeared out of the dust cloud on the fleet's port side. They were moving fast, weapons hot, and battle cruisers took moderate damage and one of the human destroyers took a hit to its drive section that sent it spinning. Then the 4 human ships broke off. They did not press the engagement. They turned and ran, not in panic, but in a controlled, coordinated withdrawal, moving back toward the dust cloud at speed. His fast attack ships gave chase and closed the distance, but the destroyers hit the dust cloud edge and disappeared into the sensor scatter before the attackers could finish the job. 2 of his battle cruisers were damaged. No human ships destroyed, 1 disabled maybe, but gone. Zarek stood on his bridge and analyzed what he had just seen. The attack had been hard enough to hurt, but not hard enough to stop him. It had cost him speed. The 2 damaged cruisers were running at 80% now, which meant the fleet had to slow to keep formation, and it had cost him time. He had lost 30 minutes in the engagement and its aftermath. The dust cloud was on his flank. The human destroyers were inside it, invisible to his sensors. He looked at Venerable. They are not running. No, Ven agreed. They are packing us, running alongside in the cloud, matching our speed. They will come out again. Almost certainly harass us. Keep us focused on the port while we advance. Zarek understood the shape of it now. He was being herded. The engagement had not been designed to stop him. It had been designed to slow him, to push his attention to one side, to cost him in small ways that added up. The destroyers in the cloud would keep poking at his flank. He would have to dedicate ships to watching for them, which would reduce what he brought to the main engagement, and every time they hit him, he would slow down a little more. He was being managed. The word sat in his mind like something cold. He could not go into the dust cloud after them. That was a trap so obvious it didn't need explaining. He could not ignore them. They would hit him again and again from a position of advantage. He could not accelerate enough to outrun the harassment without abandoning his damaged ships. Who is running this harassment element? Peleth asked almost to himself. Someone who knows exactly what they are doing. Then said quietly. Zerk said nothing. He ordered his 2 fastest undamaged cruisers to watch the cloud edge and respond to any emergence. And he pushed the fleet forward at the best speed his damaged ships could manage. He would not let this slow him to a stop. He would absorb the harassment and keep moving. He had the numbers. He had the firepower. The gate was still 1 day ahead. He would get there. That night, or what the ship's clock called night, the 6 hours of dimmed lighting that served as a rest cycle. Zirich stood alone on the observation deck and looked at the dust cloud moving alongside them in the dark. He could not see the ships inside it. That was the point. He thought about the frigate that had run, the one that got away, the extraction pattern Peleth had described. He thought about the destroyers hitting his flank and then vanishing back into cover. Hit and vanish. Hit and vanish. Not trying to destroy him, trying to slow him, tire him, cost him small amounts repeatedly. Death by small cuts, the humans called it. He had read that phrase in their military history once in a different context. He had not thought about it in years. He thought about it now. He had spent 20 years reading enemies. He had learned to feel the shape of an opponent's mind through their tactics, whether they were scared or confident, whether they were improvising or working a plan, whether they were trying to win or just trying to survive. He tried to feel the shape of Alina Voss's mind through what she was doing to him. And what he felt was not comfort. She was not afraid of him. He was sure of that. She was not scrambling to react. Not throwing ships at him in desperation to slow him down. Everything he had seen had the quality of a plan being executed, not a defense being improvised. The frigates, the timing of the destroyer attack, the positioning inside the cloud, it was all deliberate, all considered. She had known he was coming, and she had spent the time since knowing to prepare. The question was, prepare what exactly? He returned to his quarters before he could follow that thought somewhere he didn't want to go. Tomorrow he will reach the cache and gate. Tomorrow he would see what she had built and he would crash through it and this would be over. He was still sure of that. He was less sure than he had been. Alina Voss had not slept more than 4 hours in the last 3 days and she showed absolutely no sign of it. Her operations officer, Commander Sirada, had been watching her Admiral for 6 years and had privately concluded that Voss ran on some internal fuel source that was not available to normal human beings. Other officers got tired. They drank too much coffee and made short-tempered comments and rubbed their eyes during long briefings. Voss did none of these things. She simply continued with the same flat steadiness at hour 30 as she had shown at hour 1, as if exhaustion was a weather system that passed over her without making contact. Right now, Voss was standing over the main tactical table on the Callaway S bridge, looking at a display of the cache and gate approach corridor and the 17 red indicators that represented the Xerax fleet. 17 because 2 of the original 28 had peeled off and were not accounted for, which Voss had been thinking about since the morning report, and she was giving Commander Da very specific instructions in a very quiet voice. Move the Hennessy and the Gale * to position 4, she said. Keep their drive signatures cold until I give the signal. Yes, Admiral. The Brannig stays on the cloud edge. If the harassment element tries to withdraw through the eastern passage, I want them blocked. The Brannig is 1 ship against 4 destroyers, Admiral. If they push her, they won't push her. They are not there to fight. They are there to slow him down and keep his attention divided. When the main engagement starts, they will try to extract. She pointed to the eastern passage on the display. If I block the extraction route, they have to choose between staying in the cloud, useless, or coming out to engage. Either way, they are no longer affecting the main fight. She looked up at Da. They will not push the Brannig *. It is not what they are for. Da considered this and decided that the Admiral was probably right, which was the conclusion she usually reached. The Callaway had been at the cache gate for 9 days now. 9 days of positioning, of running communications quietly, of moving ships to places where they would not be immediately obvious, and then keeping those ships very still. It was the kind of operation that required everyone involved to understand not just their own role, but the intention behind it, because there would be a point in the next 24 hours when things moved too fast for orders to keep up. And at that point, everyone would need to act on understanding rather than instruction. Voss had spent the 9 days making sure they had that understanding. She had briefed her captains 3 times. Once when the operation was first laid out, once when Zerk's fleet was confirmed moving, and once in the last 48 hours when the adjustments had been made. She briefed them in person in the Callaway S main conference room with the star chart projected large and her voice unhurried and precise. She did not use dramatic language. She did not tell them that humanity was at stake or that this was a moment of historic importance. She told them where they would be, what they would do, what to do if something unexpected happened and what the goal was. The goal was not complicated. It was to destroy Zerik's fleet as completely as possible at minimum cost to her own ships in a way that would be clearly understood by anyone in the outer systems who was currently considering whether to follow Zerik's example. That last part was important. This was not just about Zerik. This was about everyone who had been watching what Zerk did to Harkin's point and deciding whether humans would absorb it or respond to it. 3 years had passed. People were drawing conclusions about what that meant. Voss intended to clarify things. Her captains had left the last briefing in the particular silence of people who have been handed a well-constructed plan and have run it through their minds and found no obvious gaps. That silence meant more to her than enthusiasm. Enthusiasm faded. Confidence built on a solid plan did not. On the 6th day at the gate, the 2 patrol squadrons she had requested arrived. Commander Da had met her in the corridor with the report, and Voss had said good and continued walking. 14 additional ships, a mix of frigates and light cruisers, had folded themselves into her disposition quietly. No celebration. The pieces were in place. On the 8th day, Lieutenant Commander Pell, her intelligence officer, a young man who worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew that what he found changed what happened to real people, had brought her updated information on the 2 ships from Zerik's fleet that had separated from the main group. The best interpretation is a flanking element. Pell had said they've gone wide around the southern dust boundary. They would be in position to hit the gate from below during a main engagement below and behind essentially, which would catch any defensive formation oriented forward. Timeline. If the main fleet reaches the gate in approximately 20 hours as projected and the flanking element maintains current speed, they arrive about 40 minutes after the main engagement starts, maybe 35. Voss had aggressive. She could see his flagship, the Vorthen Asterisk, at the center of it all, large and scarred, and coming forward without hesitation. He was not slowing down. She had not expected him to. He was the kind of commander who believed in commitment. Once you decided to do a thing, you did it without holding back because holding back gave your opponent time to read you and adjust. It was a real principle and it had served him well for 20 years. It was about to fail him for the first time. Status on our positions, she said. All ships report ready. Da said positions 4 and 7 drives cold holding. Brannig on Cloud Edge, Eastern Passage blocked. 2nd Squadron standing by at Waypoint Alpha. The Hennessy and Gale confirmed position 4 cold and dark. And the southern position. Commander Torres confirms waiting. Voss looked at the display. Zerk's fleet was through the gate now, fully inside the approach corridor, committed to the heading that brought them toward the Callaway S position. He could see her. She had made the Callaway visible, sitting at the far end of the corridor with her 6 support ships around her. A target that looked manageable if you had 28 ships and were feeling aggressive. She was the bait. She knew she was the bait. She had designed herself as the bait deliberately and had then placed the hook. He was heading straight for her. She let out a breath, not relief, more like the quiet that comes when a long calculation resolves to the number you expected. "Open a channel," she said fleet-wide. The communications officer opened the channel and nodded. "All ships," Vaz said. "This is Admiral Voss. You know your positions and you know your orders. The timeline is now active. Execute on my signal." She paused. "Make it clean, that's all." She closed the channel. Commander Da looked at her. "Admiral, do you want to say anything to Zarek's fleet? A warning or?" "No," Vaz said simply. She had nothing to say to him. Everything she wanted to communicate, she was about to communicate in a language that left no room for misunderstanding. She turned back to the display and waited. He was 2 minutes out. Zarek saw her. Calloway was right there, massive gray, sitting at the far end of the approach corridor, exactly where his intelligence had placed her. 6 ships around her, tight formation, drives lit, and weapons warm. She was not hiding. She was waiting for him out in the open, like she had all the confidence in the known universe. He felt something sharp in his chest. That might have been anticipation. "Formation Alpha," he said. His commanders heard it on the fleet channel and the fleet shifted. His battle cruisers spread wider to the flanks, his fast attack ships moving forward, the Vorthan driving hard at the center. He had run this approach 100 times in his mind over the past 3 days. Close the distance fast. Get inside her long-range weapons advantage. Hammer the * Calloway with everything in the center while his flanks swung around to prevent her support ships from reforming. Simple, brutal, effective. He had done it before. The opening volley was his. His lead cruisers fired at extreme range. Testing the * Calloway *S defensive response, watching how she reacted. Standard opening. Probe before you commit. She did not react the way he expected. She did not disperse or adjust formation. The Calloway and her 6 ships held their positions and returned fire steadily, accurately, without urgency, as if they were not concerned about 26 advancing ships at all. Something in that stillness should have told him something. He was already committed. His fleet had covered 2/3 of the distance to the * Calloway when the first new ships appeared. They came out of the dust cloud on his left. Not 4 destroyers, 9 ships, a mix of classes, drives blazing, already moving at attack speed when they emerged. They had been sitting cold inside the cloud, invisible to his sensors for however long it had taken him to cover this corridor, and now they were out and on him, and the distance between them was nothing. He had perhaps 3 seconds to absorb this before the right side erupted. 8 more ships out of the cloud on his right. Same speed, same precision, coming from an angle that caught the edge of his formation where his ships were most spread. 17 new ships from 2 directions at once. He had not seen them coming. None of them had. The noise on the northern bridge in the next 30 seconds was not panic. His crew were professionals and panic was not in their vocabulary. But it was close to controlled chaos, which was the professional version of the same thing. Everyone was calling status, calling ranges, calling weapon states, trying to recalculate a tactical situation that had just changed completely in less than half a minute. Contact port. 9 ships confirmed bearing. Starboard element moving to envelop the right flank. Forward group still closing. Calloway has fired. The Dravath * is hit drive section. She's slowing. Zarek stood at the center of it and did what he had learned to do in 20 years of fighting. He looked at the whole picture instead of any one piece of it. What he saw was a box. He was inside a box. The Calloway and her 6 ships ahead of him. 9 ships on his left, 8 on his right. And if the box was complete, if Voss had planned this as completely as everything else she had done, there would be something behind him too. Either ships moving to block the gate or the possibility that his flanking element was already compromised. He pushed that thought to the back and dealt with what was immediate. Full dispersal, he said. Break the formation, engage by element. Peleth, take the port side. Then coordinate the defense of the *Vorthen*. Peleth was already moving. He had 5 cruisers and 4 attack ships under his immediate command, and he swung them hard to meet the 9 ships coming from the left. The exchange was immediate and savage. His cruisers had more mass and firepower at close range, and the first 90 seconds of that engagement went Peleth's way. 2 of the incoming human ships took heavy damage before the human commander adjusted and started working the angles, spreading the attack, forcing Peleth's formation to turn in multiple directions at once. On the right, the 8 human ships were faster. They did not engage the battle cruisers directly. They went after the attack ships on the wing. Faster vessels matching faster vessels. And they moved with a kind of coordinated precision that told Zarek they had rehearsed this. They knew exactly where to be. They did not improvise. They were executed. And the Callaway kept coming. That was the part he had not counted on. He had assumed that once he closed the distance and the flanking ships emerged, the Callaway would hold her position and let the flanking attack do its work. Instead, she was driving forward, using the chaos on his flanks to close the remaining gap, and her 6 support ships had spread into a pattern that looked less like a defensive formation and more like a net. The first volley to hit the Vorthen came from the Callaway at medium range. It was well aimed, not the random fire of a ship shooting into a melee, but targeted specific shots at the Orthan*'s forward weapons platforms. 2 of his main battery guns went dark. The Voron shuddered and her lights flickered for a moment and then steadied. Ren was shooting back. The Vorthen had weight and power and her return fire was not nothing. One of the Callaway **S support ships took a hit to the hull and pulled off the line venting atmosphere. Progress. Small but real. Then the communication came from his flanking element. Commander Tarth running the 2 ships he had sent on the southern route had a voice that was normally flat and professional. The voice that came through the channel now was neither. We have contacted 6 human ships. Southern approach. They were waiting. They knew our route. They are in the perfect blocking position. We cannot. The channel is cut to static. Not the static of interference. The static of a ship that had stopped transmitting. Zarek stared at the communications panel. Tarth gone. His flanking element had run into a full blocking force and they had been destroyed so fast that the report and the end had arrived almost simultaneously. The Vorthen shook again, harder this time. Then called out damage. 2 more weapons platforms offline. Hull breach in Deck 7. Port shield emitters at 60%. The ship was big enough and tough enough to take a lot of punishment, but she was taking it from the Callaway and at least 2 other human ships simultaneously, and she could not absorb this indefinitely. On the port side, Peleth's engagement was going wrong. Peleth had 3 cruisers left. 2 of the original 5 had been disabled or destroyed. And one of the attack ships was running in circles with its navigation damaged. A lost thing going nowhere. The 9 human ships had not broken under his assault the way they should have. They had bent, taken the hits, adjusted, and kept pressing. They were working as one unit in a way that his own fleet spread across multiple simultaneous engagements was not. Peleth's status. Zarek said heavy casualties. Peleth said his voice had the controlled flatness of someone managing pain. I cannot hold the port side. I recommend withdrawal to the center. The channel broke. Not static this time. Peleth's ship had shifted away from the frequency, moving hard under attack that required all his attention. Zarek lost the thread of Peleth and dealt with what was in front of him. The Callaway was closed now. Close enough that Zarek could see her on the visual feed. Not just a sensor trace, but an actual image, grey and massive, coming at the Vorthen with the patient certainty of a thing that did not need to hurry. Behind her, the 6 support ships had formed exactly the net he had feared, cutting off the angles of escape. He had 12 ships left in condition to fight. The others were dead, disabled, or out of position. She was 23. The math was no longer about numbers. Numbers were the thing that had made him confident 3 days ago. The thing in front of him now was not a numbers problem. He had been taken apart. The recognition of this was not a single moment. It came in layers. Each one landing while he was dealing with something else. The flanking element is gone. Pelitha's port side collapsed. The Vorthen took fire from 3 directions at once. His formation, the thing he had built over 20 years of fighting, the thing that had held through circumstances he had never thought he would survive, dissolving around him. She had known he was coming. She had positioned her ships before he arrived. She had set the harassment element to slow him down and cost him before he even got here. She had hidden 2/3 of her fleet inside the dust clouds, cold and invisible, and let him advance all the way to close range before she showed them. She had planned for his flanking element. She had blocked his exit. She had not won this battle during this battle. She had won it 9 days ago. Vorthen hard starboard. He said, his voice was steady. He was proud of that. Get us out of the Callaway S firing line. Vin, all available weapons, focus on the starboard blocking formation. I want a gap. The Vorthen turned. She was a big ship and she turned like one, grinding around with a slowness that was physically painful to watch when every second mattered. The starboard blocking ships saw what he was doing and began to reposition. The human ships were fast. They were well coordinated. The gap he needed was smaller than it should have been by the time the Vorthen was pointed at it. He pushed her through anyway. And then the second volley from the Callaway hit the Vorthen S drive section. The ship did not explode. She was too well built for that. But the drives went from full burn to emergency minimum in the span of 2 seconds. And the physical effect of that, the entire mass of a heavy assault carrier slamming against its own deceleration, threw everyone on the bridge off their feet. When Zerk got back to his feet, the visual feed showed a starfield that was not moving. The Voron was stopped. Ven pulled himself up from the floor and checked his panel with the automated efficiency of long practice. His face did not change expression, but his voice told Zarek what his face didn't. The main drives are gone. Emergency thrusters only. We paused stationary in the approach corridor. The communications board showed 8 of his remaining fleet responding. 4 others were not responding. The ones that were responding were not in positions that helped him. The Callaway was still coming. She came to a stop 2 kilometers from the Vorthen *. Close range, weapons warm, her support ships arranged around her in a formation that covered every possible heading the Vorthen might try to move in. The human ships that had been fighting on the flanks were repositioning now, moving to form an outer ring, completing the encirclement. The channel opened. A voice calm, flat, completely unhurried. The voice of someone making a routine inquiry, not a triumphant declaration. Vorthen *. This is Admiral Voss on the Callaway *. Your main drives are offline. You are enclosed on all sides. I am giving you 60 seconds to respond before I continue the engagement. Zerk stood on the bridge of his dying ship and looked at the Callaway on the visual feed 2 kilometers away, close enough to see the weapons ports. He did not speak for 60 seconds. Zarek counted them without moving. He stood at the center of the Orthan bridge and let the seconds go by one after another, and he did not reach for the communication panel. Not from stubbornness. He was past stubbornness, past all the things that had driven him through 3 days of transit and 1 very short battle. He did not reach for the panel because he was thinking, doing what he always did when survival required it, looking at the situation with his real eyes instead of the ones that wanted it to be different, counting what he actually had instead of what he wished he had. What he had. One crippled flagship, emergency thrusters, only 8 other ships in some condition to respond, though he did not know how many of those were still combat effective. Complete encirclement, no flanking element, Pelitha's port formation destroyed or scattered, no exit route that was not covered by a human ship. Vass had 20+ ships, all operational, all in position, all waiting. The math was not ambiguous. There are options, Ven said from his station. He was not looking at Zarek when he said it. Zarek looked at him. Ven, sharp, practical, professional for 15 years, was studying his panel with too much focus. The way a man looks at something unimportant when he has said something important and is waiting to see how it lands. Say it. Zarek said the Vorthan has secondary weapons fully operational. We have a short window before they complete the encirclement, maybe 4 minutes before the outer ring closes all the angles. If we fire everything we have at the Callaway right now, we disable our own ship doing it. We burn every system we have left. Yes, but if we take the * Callaway down in that exchange, we do not take the * Callaway * down. Zirich said it plainly, not with bitterness, just as a true thing. She is not damaged. We are. We fire everything we have and maybe we hurt her, maybe we don't. And either way, we have nothing left. He paused. That is not an option. That is the end of options dressed up to look like one. Vin was quiet on the communication board. The 60-second marker passed. Vass's voice came back immediately. She had been watching the clock, too. Vorthan *, your time has passed. I am resuming the engagement in 30 seconds. If you wish to respond before then, respond now. Zarek had made decisions in desperate situations before. He had made decisions that had cost people their lives. His own people, people under his command, and people who had been in his way. He had made those decisions without excessive internal drama, because excessive internal drama was a luxury you could not afford when things were moving fast, and the cost of hesitation was worse than the cost of being wrong. He was having a harder time with this one. Not because he was afraid. He was afraid. He could feel that clearly, but fear was familiar and manageable. He was having a harder time because for the first time in 20 years, he could not see a way through. Every time he had been in a bad situation, there had been a direction, a gap, and waited. She came in alone. He had looked at her file. He had a picture in his mind from the intelligence reports, rank, insignia, service record, the dry biographical facts. None of it had prepared him for the reality of her, which was both exactly what he expected and completely different. She was not large. She was not physically imposing in the way that some commanders used their bodies as an extension of their authority. She was a compact person of middle age, with gray beginning to show at the temples and eyes that were a very specific shade of brown that he could not name, but that looked as if they had been used to see things clearly for a very long time. She sat down across from him, put a thin personal data pad on the table between them, and looked at him. Zerk, she said, not a question. Admiral, he said. She looked at him for a moment with that particular quality of attention that some people had. Not aggressive, not performative, just genuinely present, like she was actually seeing him rather than a representation of him. You came a long way, she said. I did. What did you think was going to happen? He considered the question. It deserved a real answer. I thought I would get here before you were fully prepared. I thought my numbers were sufficient to compensate for anything I might have missed. I thought he paused. I thought you were a problem I could remove. She nodded, not as if she was satisfied by this, but as if it was what she had expected him to say. And Harkin's point, she said, what did you think was going to happen when you burned it? He looked at her. I thought it was the kind of thing that happens in border space. I thought you would add it to a file and look for better patrol coverage and move on. I did add it to a file, she said. Yes, I noticed the file. Something in her expression shifted. Not a smile exactly, more the suggestion of one briefly and then gone. 6,000 people lived at Harkins Point, she said. 81 of them died in the attack. The rest lost everything they had. The colony was not rebuilt. The conditions that made it viable were tied to the mining operation, and that was destroyed. Those people scattered across other systems. She did not say it with anger. She said it the way she said everything, with the flat clarity of someone giving accurate information. I added it to a file. I worked on the problem for 3 years and here we are. He had nothing to say to that. He had burned the colony because it was in his way and because he could. He had not thought about the people in it in any significant way. They were an abstraction, a line item, a necessary inconvenience of doing a job. He had not thought about them in the 3 years since either. That was the honest truth, and he was done lying to himself. She had thought about them for 3 years. That was also the honest truth. He was not sure what to do with the distance between those two truths. What happens now? He said, it was not quite a question. You will be transferred to a military detention facility and held pending trial. The charges are significant. I will not pretend they are not. She looked at him with those flat, clear eyes. Your crew and the crews of your other ships will be processed and released. Most of them are mercenaries without specific charges against them for Harkins Point. That will be handled case by case. And the trial, he said, will happen, she said simply. Everything that needs to happen will happen. He believed that, too. She picked up her data pad, stood, and moved toward the door. She paused before reaching it, not dramatically, not with the practiced weight of someone delivering a final line, but in the way of someone who had thought of something additional. You read my file, she said without turning around. Yes, I know you did. My intelligence section flagged the inquiry 3 weeks ago. She turned then just enough to look at him over her shoulder. I wanted you to come here. I wanted you to know enough to make a deliberate choice to come here. He looked at her because this was not just about you. She said, you understand that? He understood it. The outer systems were watching. Every independent commander, every mercenary group, every warlord sitting on the edge of human-controlled space and deciding what kind of risk a human colony represented. They were watching. Zirk had been the example that something like Harkins Point could be done and walked away from. Voss had spent 3 years making him the example that it could not. She had not done it through anger or vengeance. She had done it through 3 years of patient work and one clean engagement at the cache and gate. And she had let him come to her so that when it was over, there would be no ambiguity about what had happened. He had chosen her. He had come here looking for revenge. He had gotten the wrong admiral. She left without saying anything else. The door closed. Zirk sat at the table in the quiet room and looked at the wall and thought about the 20 years behind him. And the thing that was in front of him now, and found that for the first time in a very long time he had nothing useful to calculate outside the Callaway *Sol in the wreckage of the cache and gate approach corridor. The other ships of his fleet were going dark one by one, weapons down, drives minimal, waiting for processing. The humans were moving through the debris field in small craft, checking for injured, recovering what could be recovered. They were thorough in the outer systems, in the ports and trading posts and border stations and mercenary hearing halls. The communications network was already carrying the story. It traveled the way all significant stories travel in the dark between stars, faster than any ship, jumping from transmitter to transmitter, reaching people in their ships and on their stations and in their bars before the dust at the caching gate had settled. The story was not complicated. It did not need to be. Zurich had burned a human colony. He had come back for the Admiral investigating him. He had brought 28 ships to the cache gate. There was no second chance. The listening universe drew its own conclusions. Admiral Voss in her office on the Callaway with the lights turned low and a cup of coffee going cold on her desk wrote the battle report in the same flat and precise language she used for everything. Facts, numbers, outcomes. She noted the loss of 11 human crew members across the engagement. She knew each of them by name, had already written the personal messages that would go to their families, and had already done that before she wrote anything else. She noted the damage to 3 of her ships, all reliable. She noted the capture of 8 enemy vessels and the destruction of 12 others. She noted the surrender and capture of Zarek. She did not use words like victory or triumph. She wrote what had happened accurately and submitted the report. Then she drank the cold coffee, made a face that nobody was there to see, and went to find something hot. The stars outside her viewport were the same stars they had always been, indifferent and ancient, and not caring in the least about the small, fierce creatures burning through the dark between them. That was fine. She did not need the stars to care. She had work to do.